قرآني نبض حياتي، قرآني طهر ذاتي، قرآني عصمة أمري، قرآني طوق نجاتي.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Respected brothers and sisters, I'm sure anyone living in the West or in a Muslim minority country has heard of the term feminism, and it's been thrown around by scholars here and there. You've heard that it's bad, you've heard that it conflicts with Islam, but what really is feminism? How do we understand it? When people talk about the different waves of feminism, what do they mean? What is the history of feminism? Is all feminism bad? Does it really clash with Islam? All of these are things that people are interested to know, but it's not so easy to find out. So join us on this 3-part series as we explore feminism in depth, starting with the definition, then the history, then the Islamic position, and then the proofs that support the Islamic position, and why feminism can be such a danger if it is misunderstood and if it creeps into society. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to welcome you to this first session on feminism here from the IPCI. My name is Maulana Ismail Moosa. And inshallah, we got a very interesting series ahead of us. So just to give us a broad overview, what we're going to do in the series is we're going to get an in-depth understanding of feminism, how it intersects with Islam, why it's so dangerous, and how do we as Muslims respond to it, and how do we treat those people who are affected by it. And interestingly enough, we're going to go through a poem. So Sapiens Institute has devised or has composed a poem on feminism in the Arabic language, which is now in our tradition, in the Islamic tradition, it's always been the case that in every single field, whenever scholars would explain a field, they would write a poem. So if you go to fiqh, for example, you will find poems written in fiqh to help the student memorize all of the different laws of fiqh. Because in the Islamic tradition, it's not just about writing papers and understanding, it's also about rote memory and internalizing. So here we have this wonderful, beautiful poem which was composed by Sapiens Institute. And as we go along with the explanation of feminism, then we're going to explain this poem. Now, on the Sapiens Institute website, you will find also an explanation of this poem, but this focuses more on the history and the academic side of feminism. What we want to do in this course is touch on the ground realities of feminism. So sometimes what's happening in academia, what the academics are talking about, doesn't necessarily correlate with what's happening on the ground, with how people are being affected in Muslim societies. So we want to talk about more on the reality on the ground. How do we as Muslims address this? How do we as Muslims deal with this, etc., etc. So inshallah, let's start with a broad overview of where we sit or as an ummah. So the first thing we need to understand is that when the laws of Sharia came down and they governed the entire system of human existence in the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the time of Sahaba, from then for about 1,200 years, Islam was a superpower in the world. Right? Whether it was the Umayyads, whether it was the Abbasids, whether it was the Umayyads in Spain, whether it was the Ottomans after that, but Islam was a global superpower at every single stage. And when Islam was a global superpower, then we found justice prevailing, we found the correct moral beliefs in these areas, and we also interestingly found people in other parts of the world, like Europe for example, would begin to imitate Muslims. So many Muslims don't know this, but Christians in other parts of Europe would go to Muslim Spain, they would learn Arabic, they would dress in the Islamic garb, and they would go back to their homes in the rest of Europe. In France, in the 1700s, the French would actually wear Ottoman culture dress because they looked up to them as being a superpower in the world. Now, when colonialism came, when the different European countries began conquering all of the Muslim lands or most of the Muslim lands, then we found that this superiority of Islam in a military sense, in a government sense, slowly but surely began to diminish. We had the French going to Algeria, going to Egypt. We had the British going to India and other places as well, conquering these Muslim lands, taking them over. And when they went to all of these lands, they did three things that I want to just mention, which will be very, very important for us to understand as a background before we get into feminism. The first thing they did was they separated our religion. So our religion was something that dealt with the ibadah, fasting, salah, etc., with aqidah. But our religion also speaks about the economy, the government, how to run a state, how to run a family, all of these things. And when the European powers came to these lands, what they did was they told the Muslims, you can have your ibadah, you can have your salah, you can have your Islam, no problem, you can be a Muslim. But what you need to do is, you have to be a Muslim in the house. You have to be a Muslim in the masjid. But the government, the economy, all of these things, we will take care of that. So now there's a bifurcation. There's a split in the sense that the Muslims could now practice certain parts of their religion, but other parts could not be practiced, could not be implemented. And like that, we've lived for so many centuries that now we generally tend to identify Islam with only the ibadah aspects. And we forget about the holistic understanding of Islam. So that was one thing that the colonial powers did. The second thing that they did was that they went to each of these lands and they cut off the people from their heritage. So if we take South Africa, for example, when the Dutch came and then the British after them, they began to spread myths about the local population. They began to say the Abangoni people never built any structures, they were not civilized, most of the land was empty, we didn't steal it. They spread all of these lies, right? And the purpose of these lies was to make these people feel ashamed of their own ancestry and to cut them off from their heritage. Similarly, they did this in Muslim lands, with the goal being cut the people off from their heritage. And the third and final goal, which is the culmination of everything, was that they wanted these lands. Now just think about it. They came to these lands. They came to South Africa, for example. They killed, without exaggeration, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of the local inhabitants of this land. They came there, they killed them. Then those who remained and survived, their third goal was that these people must now begin to view them as role models, the same people that killed their ancestors, that killed everyone. How can it be such that the people who murdered your ancestors, you are going to view them as role models? That the same people who were killing Muslims, who still are killing Muslims, when we look around the world, we find that the Muslims look at them as role models. Now, I'm not just talking about dressing and things like that. That's become ubiquitous. That's not an issue. I'm talking about mentally, ideologically, theologically, and for the purposes of today's discussion, with respect to morality. Right? Because many Muslims today have become so affected and so influenced by Western morality that certain parts of Islam actually make them feel as though, you know what, is this really part of Islam? They begin to question things like that. And where does this stem from? It stems purely from Western dominance. So once the West became dominant, and in the last 100 or 200 years, there are certain aspects of Islam that have come into question that have never come into question before that 1,200 years. For example, jihad. It has never been questioned ever before that. For example, marrying someone who's under the age of 18. It was never a question before that. But now all of these things are coming under the microscope because we are so influenced by Western morality. So what happens, and just think about how absurd the situation is. Example, America will go and kill literally 1 million people in Afghanistan and Iraq. Kill 1 million people. Then those same American people will come to you as a Muslim and tell you, why does your Quran have jihad? After they literally just killed millions of Muslims, they'll come to Muslims and say, why does your Quran have jihad? And you as a Muslim, instead of telling them, what is wrong with you? How can you question me? Look at what you're doing in the world. Instead of putting it back on and showing them that, look here, Islam doesn't say this, Islam doesn't actually say that, you begin to now change the deen of Allah. And you say, no, Islam doesn't advocate for jihad, it's just a spiritual, it's just this, it's just that. Those same people who are doing things 1 million times worse are making you change your own deen. So like this, a similar thing happens with feminism. Right? That the West has certain views on feminism and on women and on gender that conflicts with Islam. And we, without knowing unconsciously, subconsciously, we become affected by this. And then when we read the Muslim texts, then we begin to try and change them and distort them in a way to fit Western morality. So there's a very, very apt example which we find in the seerah, or we find also in the lives of the previous Anbiya, the dangers of looking up to a society and trying to imitate them when they are un-Islamic simply because they were powerful. We see in the Quran, chapter number 7, verse 138, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَاوَزْنَا بِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ الْبَحْرَ فَأَتَوْا عَلَىٰ قَوْمٍ يَعْكُفُونَ عَلَىٰ أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. That the Bani Israel with Musa alayhi salam, Allah had just saved them, Allah had just given them so much, and now they are crossing the sea, or they are passing by a sea town, and they see this group of people who they look up to, who they feel are very superior, and they see that these people are worshipping idols. So they tell Musa alayhi salam, قَالُوا يَا مُوسَى اجْعَلْ لَنَا إِلَهًا كَمَا لَهُمْ آلِهَةٌ. Oh Musa, we want to have a god like how they, and Allah, imagine, they are telling Musa alayhi salam, we want to have an idol like how they have an idol. And Musa alayhi salam begins to obviously rebuke them for such an outrageous statement. But we see an even clearer example in the history of the Arabs before the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam, they spread Tawheed in the Arabian Peninsula, right? And this Tawheed continued for centuries until a man came about by the name of Amr bin Luhay. And Amr bin Luhay was someone who was very prominent, and as he was traveling, he came across another civilization that were there, and he was blown away by their technological might, by their military might, and he saw that they were worshipping idols. Very, very similar story to Musa alayhi salam. And he felt that, if we want to be successful and if we want to be strong like these people, we need to do what they're doing. And so he brought idols and he imported idol worship from these people into Arabia, and that is how the Quraysh and the other Arab people, their Tawheed, which was there from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, was corrupted. Why? Where did it all stem from? It stemmed from this false reasoning of Amr bin Luhay, which today we're doing the same thing, where you see a people who are technologically superior to you, you see a people who are militarily superior to you, and you think that the way to become like them is to follow them in every single thing. You think because they are good at science, therefore their morality is correct, which is completely incorrect. Now, before we actually go on to feminism, we need to understand the danger that happens here. So if a person imbibes ideologies that are against Islam, and he believes them, and he firmly believes them, although he may not consciously think about it, when he now comes towards the nusus, the Islamic text, the Quran and the Hadith, and he realizes that the Quran and Hadith are against these ideologies which are ingrained within him, then he is at a crossroads now. Either he has to leave the ideologies, or he has, now Allah protect us, he has to leave the Quran and Hadith. And we've seen many people in the West, when they've realized that Islam is against their understanding of feminism, Islam is against their understanding of gender equality, Allah protect us, but they have rejected certain parts of the Quran. So just for us to put everything into context here, when we discuss feminism, we're discussing a Western ideology that has been pushed onto Islam from the outside, that we should never ever feel that we need to reinterpret Islamic texts because of that. Perhaps the most important thing is defining what is feminism, because people really get confused. You have people on either end of the spectrum. So you have some people who define feminism as anything that they don't like. So a woman going out to work because she needs to, they'll say that's feminism. That's incorrect, right? And then you'll have other people who will say, no, feminism is no danger. Feminism just wants to stop women from being abused. That's it. That's the only definition of feminism. Now that also is wrong. So we need to understand what we're talking about exactly when we say feminism, so that we can then be in a correct place to refute the real feminism and not something else that's made up, right? So the definition that we're going to use here, and you will find it there partly in the poem, is the following, and this is very crucial. The definition of feminism that we need to be aware of, that we need to be responding to, is the ideology. So this is the definition. Feminism is the ideology that asserts that men and women are identical. So again, I'm not using the word equal, I'm using the word identical. They're the same thing. Men and women are exactly the same with no differences, right? That is what we mean by feminism, the ideology that asserts identicality between men and women, and together with that, it asserts that superiority and inferiority is based on your job status, is based on how much you earn, is based on how famous you are. That determines whether you are superior or inferior. So these are the two core principles of feminism that we need to remember. Number one, it says that men and women are identical. And number two, it says that superiority and inferiority is based on your earnings, it's based on your pay, it's based on your job status. Now, let's look at the first line of the poem, which you're going to see on the screen now, right? And it starts off with the heading there, Faslun and Nasawiya. The poem is in Arabic, but we'll translate it, and if you can, it's nice to memorize it. So this is the chapter on feminism and Nasawiya. So it says, وَالنَّسَوِيَّةُ دَعَتْ لِمَا أَسَى. Feminism is that which calls towards لِلِسْتِوَاءِ بَيْنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ. It calls towards complete identicality between men and women. Although the word here, istiwa, is used to mean equality, but as we saw, what feminism really asserts is identicality. So that's the definition of feminism. Now, when you understand this definition, the two core principles of feminism, it will give you the understandings of all of the symptoms of feminism that we see in the people around us, right? So, for example, many people look down on a woman who stays at home, looks after the children, looks after the house. They look down on this. Why do they look down on it? Because let's look at the two principles of feminism. Because staying at home means that you don't have a job. It means that you are inferior in life because of these two principles. They look at women who become pregnant and serve their husband and all of these things. They look down on them. Why? Because inferiority is based on your job status. These women are not working. They're not in corporate. They're not doing all of these things, right? They believe that men and women women should be able to dress freely. They should be able to expose their bodies, expose their hair. Why? Because of the first principle. Men and women are equal. Men and women are identical. They're exactly the same. So therefore, they should be treated the same. Women shouldn't have to cover more of their body than men. And like that, all of the different things that we find about feminism that we're going to talk about, like saying that women must go out to earn a job, that women must definitely have the exact same job statuses as men in all of these things. All of this stems from these two principles. Number one, that men and women are identical, and number two, that inferiority and superiority is based on your job status, right? So it's very, very, very important to understand these two principles and how it branches out, right? The other important thing to understand is that feminism is an aqidah. It's a belief. So these two things are beliefs. A person believes that men and women are identical. That is feminism. A person believes that superiority and inferiority is based on your job status. That is part of feminism. Feminism is not certain actions, and we have to be very, very clear about this. A woman seeking an education, it's not feminism. A woman who has to work in a permissible way, it's not feminism. These actions do not constitute feminism in and of themselves. We should not be attacking these actions. We need to be going after the false ideology and the aqidah which believes in these two principles that I have just mentioned. So this is a core thing, because many times when we talk about feminism and we talk about the harms that it has, women feel attacked in the sense that they feel like, oh, okay, so you're telling us we can't get an education, you're telling us we can't go out to work, you're telling us we can't do this. It's not saying any of those things. That is not what we're saying. Feminism is limited to these two principles and the symptoms of these two principles. So if a woman is going out to work because she legitimately needs to, or it's being done in a completely halal way and there's nothing haram about it, and she's still taking care of her children and her husband and the house and all of these things, it's not feminism. But if a woman goes out to work because she believes that superiority and inferiority is based on your job status, and she believes that men and women are identical, then that is feminism. So it's the belief that we're targeting and not the specific actions. Now, feminism is also a world view, right? So in the feminist worldview, since superiority and inferiority based on your job status and whether you're going out to work and all of these things, when they look at the history, of mankind, and they see that in every single civilization almost, men would go out to work, women would stay at home and look after the children. This is like ubiquitous, it's everywhere in human history. So when they look at human history, they see that for the entire human history, women stayed at home. That means women were oppressed for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So feminism also has a historical worldview where it looks towards history and it says, well, women were oppressed for millennia. And this is actually, it's insulting to women. Because all of those women were not oppressed. They chose to stay at home. This was what they felt was the right thing to do. But now modern women who subscribe to the feminism that we are talking about, they look at all of those hundreds of thousands of millions of women in the past and they say, you were inferior to the man. You were bossed by the man. You were oppressed. Whereas those women were not oppressed, they chose to do that. If you had to go back into the past and ask those women, they'll say, yes, this is what we wanted to do. We are not being oppressed in any way. So feminism actually looks down on the majority of women by asserting that men in the past oppressed them, men in the past were superior to them, and now we need to change that, right? So in that, there comes a term that we need to get used to if we're going to talk about feminism, and that is the patriarchy. So patriarchy, or a patriarchal society, is any society where men are in the positions of leadership and as opposed to women. So this is how societies functioned, as we said, from the beginning of time. As far as we can tell, this is how all societies functioned until we came to the last 100 years or so. So there's no doubt that in some of these patriarchal societies in the past, there was oppression of women. There's no doubt about that, right? But it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the system. So for example, in many democracies around the world, there's oppression, there's corruption, there's all of these things. It doesn't mean democracy is wrong now because of that. So similarly here, the case would be the same, that yes, certain patriarchal societies, the non-Muslim ones specifically, would have been oppressive to women. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't mean now that the patriarchy is wrong. So when a person begins to accept these principles, and these principles, if you really think about it, they're very ingrained in our society. So many times I've heard men and women, and this is another fundamental point, that feminism is not something that affects women only, it affects men as well. Men are also afflicted by feminism, and I'll explain to you how. We've heard men and women always saying, but don't you think this woman should have to do something more than just staying at home and looking after her children the whole day? So the way they talk about a woman staying at home, the way they talk about looking after children, which is such a noble thing, the way they talk about it is in a disdainful way, is in a something despicable, something lowly, something repugnant, something we don't want to look at. And this is something that's found amongst the men and women around us. And why? It's because they've imbibed and ingrained these principles and they didn't realize. Now what happens to many men and women who feel that men and women are identical, they should both be doing the same things? What happens to them is they look at the fiqh rulings around us and they see that, wait, in fiqh, a man divorces a woman doesn't divorce a man. So now they think, but men and women are supposed to be equal. How come the man can divorce but the woman can't divorce? Then they say, wait, when the divorce happens, the woman must sit in iddah but not the man. And now it feels strange to them because they think, wait, men and women are equal, so why the man can give divorce, the woman can't? Why the woman must sit in iddah, the man doesn't? So now they say it's unfair. Na'udhu billah, Allah protect us, right? And then from there, they begin to question the fiqh. They say, okay, but who came up with this fiqh? It was just human beings. These human beings were influenced by the patriarchy. That's why they came up with these things. So they discard the entire fiqh one side, na'udhu billah, they discard it one side. Then they come to hadith and they see that in hadith also Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam has emphasized these things. The hadith speaks about different roles for men, different roles for women. And then they begin to say, okay, but maybe the hadith is weak, this, that, and Allah protect us, they discard that as well. Then they come to Quran and they see in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about the iddah. In the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that men are the ones who give divorce and not women. And now they are completely lost. What do we do now? Because we believe these principles to be true, and now we can see the Quran is going against it, and they are faced with a crossroads, and it's a dilemma that many people in the West and out of the West, they come to this crossroad and they're not sure what to do, and many of them, Allah protect us, have taken the wrong road over there. And all of them never thought to themselves that, okay, men give the divorce and not women, but men have to look after the woman. Men have to make sure that the woman have a place to stay. Men have to give the woman nafaqa. Nafaqa means spending, and sukna, a place to stay, upkeep, all of these things. They didn't think about that. They only looked at it from one perspective, and they found that it was, in their understanding, unfair. So let's go now to the Islamic position on all of these, and you'll see why it makes so much of sense, right? So Islam disagrees with both of those principles. In Islam, men and women are equal, but they're not identical. So Islam believes completely in equality for men and women. They must get the same treatment that befits them, equality. But Islam does not believe in identicality, because as we will see in later episodes, physically, mentally, emotionally, according to science from the West, men and women are different. And to treat two things that are different in the same way is injustice, is oppression. So I'll give you a very simple example, and it's commonsensical. If you have a large corporate company and you hire 5 people who are specialists in computer studies, and you hire another 5 chartered accountants. So these people come to you. One group has a specialty in accounting, the other group has a specialty in IT. You call all of them there, you say, okay, you know what, we have this new rule of equality here in the office, so therefore all of you must fix the computers. So will that be fair on the chartered accountants to expect them to fix the computers when they studied for so many years accounting, and you want them to fix the computers? It's not going to make sense. Whenever you have two sets of different things, you treat them differently. You don't treat them in the exact same way. It's just a commonsensical thing. You give the IT people the computers to fix, you give the accountants the books to do. It makes perfect sense. Similarly, men and women are different physically, mentally, emotionally, in all of these things, as we will see the scientific studies. Therefore, to treat them exactly the same will be to oppress one of them. If you make women who were designed physically, mentally, emotionally to do one thing, if you force them to do something else which they were not designed for, that is oppression, and that is what feminism does, and that is what Islam is against. In the eyes of the Sharia, men and women have equal standing. There is no such thing as men are superior to women or women are superior to men or all of these things. No, they are equal, but they are different, and therefore they will be treated differently. So you will find that the Sharia will treat each one of them according to what they are best suited for. Men must go out and earn a living. Men have to go to war. Men have to provide for the family financially. Men have to protect the family physically. Women are in charge of the house. Women are in charge of upbringing children. And this is something that scientifically we will see women are better suited for. Women are much better than men at taking care of children. Women are much better than men at organizing and doing things like that, and that is why Islam gives them certain rights and responsibilities and gives men other rights and responsibilities. And this is a very fundamental thing that we need to understand, because most of the objections that come against Islam on this topic, we shouldn't even be answering them. So if someone asks you, well, how come a man has to do this but a woman doesn't have to do that? How come a woman has to do this but a man doesn't have to do this in Islam? Right? Whether they use the divorce example or they use the Iddah example or whatever it is, we don't need to answer them. We need to ask them, why do you believe that men and women should be treated the same when they are different? In your life, when two things are different, do you treat them exactly the same? No, you don't. So why are you having this false assumption that we must treat men and women exactly the same when you agree, because any sane person will agree that physically at least men and women are different? Why would we then treat them the same? This is very, very important for when we're answering objections against. So someone might say, for example, when it comes to inheritance, or how come the woman doesn't get the same amount as the man? So instead of trying to say no this, no that, the first thing should be men and women are different. Therefore, they will be treated differently. The men have to look after the woman, so they need more so that they can look after the woman. The woman's money is all hers. She doesn't have to spend it on anyone else. Therefore, there's all of these reasons. And when we look at the inheritance, for example, the inheritance in Islam, most people don't realize this. There's 4 cases where a woman gets half, a female gets half of what a male gets, right? And in these 4 cases, it's because her male counterpart has to look after her, has to spend on her, etc. Therefore, he gets more, right? There's 11 cases where the female gets the same as the male because the male in that case is not obligated to look after her, for example, right? There are other cases where the female gets more than the male, and this you see sometimes, for example, like the grandmother and other older people who may not have people to support her, etc. Then she gets more than the male in those examples. So Islam looks at things based on the situation, based on the reality. It doesn't just blindly say you all are all the same, therefore you will all get the same amount. That wouldn't make any sense, but that is what people want us to believe today. And you find that the Quran, explains this so beautifully. It says, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا. Allah is telling us that you, mankind, some of you, men and women, you shouldn't desire and look to what the other people have and say that, this other group has this, we want it, or, we have less and we want to be with them, exactly the same as them. Allah says, لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا. The men, based on what they do, they will be rewarded in that way, and the women, based on what they do, they will be rewarded in that way. So these 2 groups are different. The Quran says, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى. Men and women, the male and the female, they are different. إِنَّمَا النِّسَاء شَقَائِقُ الرِّجَالِ. And there's a hadith which says that men and women in this situation, they are treated equally. When it comes to the akhirah, when it comes to things of the hereafter, men and women are treated equally. And that's where we go to the second principle, that superiority and inferiority in Islam is not based on your job status, it's not based on your earnings, it's not based on any of these things, it's based on your status in the hereafter. That person who has a higher status in Jannah, he is better than the person who has a lower status. If the woman, if a certain woman A, has a higher status in Jannah, then she is better than that man who has a lower status. And that is based on your amal, on your actions, on your piety. And this is equal between men and women. They both have commandments that they have to follow. They both have prohibitions that they have to stay away from. Whoever does it better, whoever is closer to Allah, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, whoever has the most taqwa, then this person will be close to Allah, will be closer to Allah. There is no difference now based on whether you're a man or a woman. Then when we look at other verses in the Quran, and this is where we must be very, very clear about this, that the Quran is categorical. الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. Men are the caretakers, maintainers, providers for the woman. Why? So the Quran doesn't just say men are in charge of women, finished. No, the Quran says men are in charge of women because they have a responsibility. بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. Because Allah has given them certain qualities like physical superiority, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them the responsibility of taking care of their woman. So therefore they are now in charge, they are the maintainers. If you read all of the books of tafsir, they explain to you that men are in charge of the household. This is clear, this is categorical in Islam. This is not something that we can compromise on, that Islam speaks about. The Quran and the Hadith speak about فَالصَّالِحَاتُ qanitatun. The pious women are those who are obedient to their husband. So within the family structure, Islam does say that the man is in charge, the woman will have to be obedient, will have to listen to the man, but obviously within reason, and the man has to provide for her, the man has to do all of these things as well. There are rights and responsibilities one on the other. Now this verse was so categorical and clear that there is a lady who calls herself a Muslim, but she's not a Muslim. Her name is Amina Wadud, and she says she's a feminist. She says, when I read this verse that I just said, الرجال قوامون على النساء, when I read this verse, I said no. Na'udhu billah, Allah protect us. Imagine you're reading the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're saying no to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why would that happen? It happens because you're so influenced, you're so brainwashed, you're so overtaken by these ideologies from the West, that even the word of Allah coming to you now, you're having difficulty accepting it. So this is the danger, this is what we need to be aware of, and this is what we need to understand very clearly, right? Now, inshallah, we're going to stop here, and in the next session we're going to start talking about the different waves of feminism and the history. But this lesson was very, very important, and I just want to recap this lesson, although it was simple, right? But it was important. So what we say when we're talking about feminism is an aqidah, is a belief that men and women are identical, and superiority and inferiority is based on your job status. So therefore, men and women should have the same job status. There shouldn't be any differences in those things, because that's how you judge equality, based on that. And then we spoke about how that transfers now into the symptoms that we see, where people look down on motherhood, where people show disdain to women, staying at home, looking after the children, which is what our wives, what the wives of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, what our mothers did, what the Sahabiyat did. They looked down on this. Men and women, Muslim and non-Muslim, they looked down at something that was taken to be a pride, that was something to be a source of pride for in the earlier generations, in the time of Sahaba, etc. So all of the symptoms that you see there, men and women must dress like in the same way, they both should go out to work, both of them need to look after the children, all of these things. These are just symptoms of those two principles. And then we see that Islam, when it comes to these two principles, Islam says that men and women are equal, they have an equal right to get into Jannah and to stay away from Jahannam, they have an equal opportunity, but they are not identical, physically, mentally, emotionally. As science has also said, they are different. If two things are different, we treat them differently, and that's why there are different laws in certain cases for men and different laws in certain cases for women. And inshallah, in the next episode, we're going to explore the history of feminism, first wave, second wave, third wave. We're going to see which wave applies to the feminism that we're talking about, and then we're going to see how feminism has harmed society. And in the last episode, we're going to talk about our responses to feminism. How do we answer the objections that are put forth? And also, how do we explain to a person who is sincere that feminism is dangerous and against Islam? I do hope you enjoyed this. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
الحميد المجيد الرشيد الشهيد اللطيف الخبير